The situation at Dunlodion was complicated. Nearly every situation tended to be when it was connected with King Pellinore, even in the wildest north. In the first place, he was in love. That was why he had been weeping in the boat. He explained it to Queen Morgause on the first opportunity, because he was lovesick, not seasick. What had happened was this. The king had been hunting the questing beast a few months earlier on the south coast of Gramarye, when the animal had taken to the sea. She had swam away, her serpentine head undulating on the surface like a swimming grass snake, and the king had hailed a passing ship which looked as if it were off to the Crusades. Sir Gramor and Sir Palomides had been in the ship, and they had kindly turned it round to pursue the beast. The three of them had arrived on the coast of Flanders, where the beast had disappeared in a forest, and there, while they were staying at a hospitable castle, Pellinore had fallen in love with the Queen of Flanders' daughter. This was fine so far as it went, for the lady of his choice was a managing, middle-aged, stout-hearted creature who could cook, ride a straight line, and make beds, but the hopes of all parties had been dashed at the start by the arrival of the magic barge. The three knights had got into it and sat down to see what would happen, because knights were never supposed to refuse an adventure. But the barge had promptly sailed away of its own accord, leaving the Queen of Flanders' daughter anxiously waving her pocket handkerchief. The questing beast had thrust her head out of the forest before they lost sight of land, looking, so far as they could see at a distance, even more surprised than the lady. After that, they had gone on sailing till they arrived in the Out Isles, and the further they went, the more lovesick the king had become, which made his company intolerable. He spent the time writing poems and letters, which could never be posted, or telling his companions about the princess, whose nickname in her family circle was Piggy. A state of affairs like this might have been bearable in England, where people like the Pellinores did sometimes turn up, and even won a sort of tolerance from their fellow men. But in Lothian and Orkney, where Englishmen were tyrants, it achieved an almost supernatural impossibility. None of the islanders could understand what King Pellinore was trying to cheat them out of by pretending to be himself, and it was thought wiser and safer not to acquaint any of the visiting knights with the facts about the war against Arthur. It was better to wait until their plots had been penetrated. On top of this, there was a trouble which distressed the children in particular. Queen Morgause had set her cap at the visitors. "What was our mother at doing?" asked Gawain, as they made their way towards St. Tordilvac's cell one morning, "with the knights on the mountain?" Gaheris answered with some difficulty after a long pause. "They were at hunting a unicorn." "How do you do that?" "There must be a virgin to attract it." "Our mother," said Agravaine, who also knew the details, "went on a unicorn hunt, and she was the virgin for them." His voice sounded strange as he made this announcement. Gareth protested. "I did not know she was wanting a unicorn. She's never said so." Agravaine looked at him sideways, cleared his throat, and quoted, "Half a word is sufficient to a wise man." "How do you know this?" asked Gawain. "We listened." They had a way of listening on the spiral stairs during the times when they were excluded from their mother's interests. Gaheris explained, with unusual freedom since he was a taciturn boy. "She told Sir Gramor that this king's lovesick melancholy could be dispelled by interesting him in his old pursuits. They were at saying that this king is in the habit of hunting a beast which has become lost. So she said that they were to hunt a unicorn instead, and she would be the virgin for them. They were surprised, I think. They walked in silence until Gawain suggested, almost as if it were a question, I was hearing it told that the king is in love with a woman out of Flanders, and that Sir Grummore is married. Also, the Saracen is black in his skin? No answer. It was a long hunt, said Gareth. I heard they did not catch one. Do these knights enjoy to be playing this game with our mother? Gareth explained for the second time. Even if he were silent, he was not unobservant. I do not think they would be understanding at all. They plodded on, reluctant to disclose their thoughts. St. Tordilvac's cell was like an old-fashioned straw beehive, except that it was bigger and made of stone. It had no windows and only one door, through which you had to crawl. Your Holiness, they shouted when they got there, kicking the heavy unmortared stones. Your Holiness, we've come to hear a story. He was a source of mental nourishment to them, a sort of guru, as Merlin had been to Arthur, who gave them what little culture they were ever to get. They resorted to him like hungry puppies, anxious for any kind of eatable, when their mother had cast them out. He had taught them to read and write. Now, said the saint, sticking his head out of the door, the prosperity of God on you this morning. The self-same prosperity on you. Is there any news at you? There is not, said Gawain, suppressing the unicorn. St. Tordilvac heaved a deep sigh. There is none at me either, he said. Could you tell us a story? Them stories now, there doesn't be any good in them. What would I be wanting to tell you a story for, and me in my heresies? 'Tis 40 years since I fought a natural battle, and not a one of me looking upon a white colleen all that time. So how would I be telling stories? You could tell us a story without any colleens or battles in it. And what would be the good of that now? He exclaimed indignantly, coming out into the sunlight. If you were to fight a battle, said Gawain, but he left out about the colleens, you might feel better. My sorrow, cried Tordilvac. What do I want to be a saint for at all, is my puzzle. If I could fetch one crack at somebody with me old shillelagh, here he produced a frightful-looking weapon from under his gown, wouldn't it be better than all the saints in Ireland? Tell us about the shillelagh. They examined the club carefully, while His Holiness told them how a good one should be made. He told them that only a root growth was any good, as common branches were apt to break, especially if they were of crab-tree, and how to smear the club with lard and wrap it up and bury it in a dunghill while it was being straightened, and polish it with black lead and grease. He showed the hole where the lead was poured in, and the nails through the end, and the notches near the handle which stood for ancient scalps. Then he kissed it reverently and replaced it under his gown with a heartfelt sigh. He was play-acting and putting on the accent. Tell us about the black arm which came down the chimney. Oh, the heart isn't in me, said the saint. I haven't the heart of a hare. It's bewitched I am entirely. I think we're bewitched too, said Gareth. Everything seems to go wrong. There was this one in it, began Tordilvac, and she was a woman. There was a husband living in Malain Big with this woman. There was only one little girl that they had between them. One day the man went out to cut in the bog, and when it was the time for his dinner, this woman sent the little girl out with his bit of dinner. When the father was sitting to his dinner, the little girl suddenly made a cry. Look now, father, do you see the large ship out yonder under the horizon? I could make it come into the shore beneath the coast. You could not do that, said the father. I am bigger than you are, and I could not do it myself. Well, look at me now, said the little girl, and she went to the well that was near there and made a stirring in the water. The ship came in at the coast. She was a witch, explained Gersh.
"It was the mother was the witch,"
said the saint, and continued with his story.
"Now," says she, "I could make the ship be struck against the coast." "You could not do that," says the father. "Well, look at me now," says the little girl, and she jumped into the well. The ship was dashed against the coast and broken into 1,000 pieces. "Who has taught you to do these things?" asked the father. "My mother, and when you do be at working, she teaches me to do things with the tub at home."
"Why did she jump into the well?" asked Agravaine. "Was she wet?"
"Hush! When this man got home to his wife, he set down his turf cutter and put himself in his sitting. Then he said, 'What have you been teaching to the little girl? I do not like to have this pissage in my house, and I will not stay with you any longer.' So he went away, and they never saw a one of him again. I do not know how they went on after that."
"It must be dreadful to have a witch for a mother," said Gareth when he had finished. "Or for a wife," said Gawain.
"It's worse not to be having a wife at all," said the saint,
and he vanished into his beehive with startling suddenness, like the man in the Swiss weather clock who retires into a hole when it is going to be fine. The boys sat round the door without surprise, waiting for something else to happen. They considered in their minds the questions of wells, witches, unicorns, and the practices of mothers. "I make this proposition," said Gareth unexpectedly, "my heroes, that we have a unicorn hunt of our own." They looked at him. "It would be better than not having anything. We have not seen our mummy for 1 week." "She has forgotten us," said Agravaine bitterly. "She has not so. You are not to speak in that way of our mother. It is true. We have not been to serve at dinner even. It is because she has a necessity to be hospitable to these knights. No, it is not. What is it then? I will not say." "If we could do a unicorn hunt," said Gareth, "and bring this unicorn which she requires, perhaps we would be allowed to serve." They considered the idea with a beginning of hope. "Saint Turtleback," they shouted, "come out again! We want to catch a unicorn!" The saint put his head out of the hole and examined them suspiciously. "What is a unicorn? What are they like? How do you catch them?" He nodded the head solemnly and vanished for the second time, to return on all fours in a few moments with a learned volume, the only secular work in his possession. Like most saints, he made his living by copying manuscripts and drawing pictures for them. "You need a maid for bait," they told him. "We have galore of maids," said Gareth. "We could take any of the maids, or cook. They would not come. We could take the kitchen maid. We could make her to come. And then, when we have caught the unicorn which is wanted, we will bring it home in triumph and give it to our mother. We will serve it supper every night. She will be pleased, perhaps after supper, whatever the event. And Sir Grummore will knight us. He will say, 'Never has such a doughty deed been done, by my halidome.'" Saint Turtleback laid the precious book on the grass outside his hole. The grass was sandy and had empty snail shells scattered over it, small yellowish shells with a purple spiral. He opened the book, which was a bestiary called Liber de Natura Quorundam Animalium, and showed that it had pictures on every page. They made him turn the vellum quickly with its lovely Gothic manuscript, skipping the enchanting griffins, bonacons, cocodrills, manticores, chaladri, kinnelmalgai, sirens, peridaxians, dragons, and aspidoshalons. In vain for their eager glances did the antelope rub its complicated horns against the tamarisk tree, thus entangled, becoming a prey to its hunters. In vain did the bonacon emit its flatulence in order to baffle the pursuers. The peridaxians, sitting on trees which made them immune to dragons, sat unnoticed. The panther blew out his fragrant breath, which attracted his prey, without interest for them. the tigress, who could be deceived by throwing down a glass ball at its feet, in which, seeing itself reflected, it thought to see its own cubs. The lion, who spared prostrate men or captives, was afraid of white cooks, and brushed out his own tracks with a foliated tail. The ibex, who could bound down from mountains unharmed because he bounced upon his curly horns. The yale, who could move his horns like ears. The she-bear, who was accustomed to bear her young as lumps of matter and lick them into whatever shape she fancied afterwards. The chaladrius bird, who, if facing you when it sat on your bed rail, showed that you were going to die. The hedgehogs, who collected grapes for their progeny by rolling on them and brought them back on the end of their prickles. Even the aspidoshalone, who was a large, whale-like creature with 7 fins and a sheepish expression, to whom you were liable to moor your boat in mistake for an island if you were not careful. Even the aspidoshalone scarcely detained them. At last he found them the place at the unicorn, called by the Greeks rhinoceros. It seemed that the unicorn was as swift and timid as the antelope, and could only be captured in one way. You had to have a maid for bait, and when the unicorn perceived her alone, he would immediately come to lay his horn in her lap. There was a picture of an unreliable-looking virgin, holding the poor creature's horn in one hand, while she beckoned to some spearmen with the other. Her expression of duplicity was balanced by the fatuous confidence with which the unicorn regarded her. Gawain hurried off as soon as the instructions had been read and the picture digested, to fetch the kitchen maid without delay. "Now then," he said, "you have to come with us on the mountain to catch a unicorn." "Oh, Master Gawain," cried the maid he had caught hold of, whose name was Meg. "Yes, you have. You are to be the bait, whatever. It will come and put its head in your lap." Meg began to weep. "Now then, don't be silly." "Oh, Master Gawain, I do not want a unicorn. I have been a decent girl, I have, and there's all the washing up to do. And if Mistress Truelove do catch me playing at truant, I shall get stick, Master Gawain, that I will." He took her firmly by the plaits and led her out. In the clean bog-wind of the high tops they discussed the hunt. Meg, who cried incessantly, was held by the hair to prevent her from running away, and occasionally passed from one boy to the other, if the one who was holding her happened to want both hands for gestures. "Now then," said Gawain, "I am the captain. I'm the oldest, so I'm the captain." "I thought of it," said Gareth. "The question is, it says in the book that the bait must be left alone." "She will run away." "Will you run away, Meg?" "Yes, please, Master Gawain." "There. Then she must be tied." "Oh, Master Gaheris, if it is your will, need I be tied?" "Close your mouth, you're only a girl." "There's nothing to tie her with." "I'm the captain, my heroes, and I command that Gareth runs back home to fetch some rope." "That I will not." "But you will destroy everything if you do not do so." "I do not see why I should have to go. I thought of it." "Then I command our Agravaine to go." "Not I." "Let Gaheris go." "I will not." "Meg, you wicked girl, you are not to run away, do you hear?" "Yes, Master Gawain, but, oh, Master Gawain." "If we could find a strong heather root," said Agravaine, "we could tie her pigtails together round the other side of it." "We will do that." "Oh." After they had secured the virgin, the 4 boys stood round her, discussing the next stage. They had abstracted real boar spears from the armory, so they were properly armed. "This girl," said Agravaine, "is my mother. This is what our mammy was at doing yesterday, and I'm going to be Sir Gramor. I will be Pellinore. Agravaine can be Gramor if he wants to be, but the bait has got to be left alone. It says so in the book." "Oh, Master Gawain! Oh, Master Agravaine!" "Stop howling, you will frighten the unicorn." "And then we must go away and hide. That is why our mother did not catch it, because the knight stayed with her." "I'm going to be Finn McCowl." "I shall be Sir Palomides." "Oh, Master Gawain, pray do not leave me alone."
"Hold in your noise," said Gawain. "You're silly. You ought to be proud to be the page. Our mother was yesterday."
Gareth said, "Never mind, Meg, do not cry. We will not let it hurt you."
"After all, it can only kill you," said Agravaine brutally.
At this, the unfortunate girl began to weep more than ever.
"Why do you say that?" asked Gawain angrily. "You always try to frighten people. Now she's at howling more than before."
"Look," said Gareth, "look, poor Meg. Meg, do not cry. It will be with me to let you have some shots with my catapult when we go home."
"Oh, Master Gareth." "Ah, come your ways. We cannot bother with her."
There.
Oh. "Meg," said Gawain, making a frightful face, "if you do not stop squealing, I will look at you like this." She dried her tears at once. "Now," he said, "when the unicorn comes, we must all rush out and stick it. Do you understand?"
"Must it be killed?"
"Yes, it must be killed dead."
"I see. I hope it will not hurt it," said Gareth.
"That is the sort of foolish hope you would have," said Agravaine.
"But I do not see why it should be killed."
"So that we may take it home to our mother, you Umadon."
"Could we catch it," asked Gareth, "and lead it to our mother, do you think? I mean, we could get Meg to lead it if it was tame."
Gawain and Gareth agreed to this. "If it is tame," they said, "it would be better to bring it back alive. That is the best kind of big game hunting." "We could drive it," said Agravaine. "We could hit it along with sticks." "We could hit Meg too," he added as an afterthought.
Then they hid themselves in their ambush and decided to keep silence. There was nothing to be heard except the gentle wind, the heather bees, the skylarks very high, and a few distant snuffles from Meg. When the unicorn came, things were different from what had been expected. He was such a noble animal to begin with, that he carried a beauty with him. It held all spellbound who were within sight. The unicorn was white, with hoofs of silver and a graceful horn of pearl. He stepped daintily over the heather, scarcely seeming to press it with his airy trot, and the wind made waves in his long mane, which had been freshly combed. The glorious thing about him was his eye. There was a faint bluish furrow down each side of his nose, and this led up to the eye sockets and surrounded them in a pensive shade. The eyes, circled by this sad and beautiful darkness, were so sorrowful, lonely, gentle, and nobly tragic that they killed all other emotion except love. The unicorn went up to Meg the kitchen maid and bowed his head in front of her. He arched his neck beautifully to do this, and the pearl horn pointed to the ground at her feet, and he scratched in the heather with his silver hoofs to make a salute. Meg had forgotten her tears. She made a royal gesture of acknowledgment and held out her hand to the animal. "Come, unicorn," she said, "lay your head in my lap, if you like." The unicorn made a whinny and pawed again with his hoof. Then, very carefully, he went down first on one knee and then on the other, till he was bowing in front of her. He looked up at her from this position with his melting eyes, and at last laid his head upon her knee. He stroked his flat white cheek against the smoothness of her dress, looking at her beseechingly. The whites of his eyes rolled with an upward flash. He settled his hind quarters coyly and lay still, looking up. His eyes brimmed with trustfulness, and he lifted his near fore in a gesture of pawing. It was a movement in the air only, which said, "Now attend to me, give me some love. Stroke my mane, will you, please?" There was a choking noise from Agravaine in the ambush, and at once he was rushing toward the unicorn with a sharp boar spear in his hands. The other boys squatted upright on their heels, watching him. Agravaine came to the unicorn and began jabbing his spear into its quarters, into its slim belly, into its ribs. He squealed as he jabbed, and the unicorn looked to Meg in anguish. It leapt and moved suddenly, still looking at her reproachfully, and Meg took its horn in one hand. She seemed entranced, unable to help it. The unicorn did not seem able to move from the soft grip of her hand on its horn. The blood, caused by Agravaine's spear, spurted out upon the blue-white coat of hair. Gareth began running, with Gawain close after him. Gaheris came last, stupid and not knowing what to do. "Don't!" cried Gareth. "Leave him alone! Don't! Gawain came up just as Agravaine's spear went in under the fifth rib. The unicorn shuddered. He trembled in all his body and stretched his hind legs out behind. They went out almost straight, as if he were doing his greatest leap, and then quivered, trembling in the agony of death. All the time his eyes were fixed on Meg's eyes, and she still looked down at his. "What are you doing?" shouted Gawain. "Leave him alone! No harm at him!" "Oh, unicorn," whispered Meg. The unicorn's legs stretched out horizontally behind him and stopped trembling. His head dropped in Meg's lap. After a last kick they became rigid, and the blue lids rose half over the eye. The creature lay still. "What have you done?" cried Gareth. "You have killed him! He was beautiful!" Agravaine bawled. "This girl is my mother. He put his head in her lap. He had to die." "We said we would keep him," yelled Gawain. "We said we would take him home and be allowed to supper." "Poor unicorn," said Meg. "Look," said Gaheris, "I'm afraid he's dead." Gareth stood square in front of Agravaine, who was 3 years older than he was and could have knocked him down quite easily. "Why did you do it?" he demanded. "You are a murderer. It was a lovely unicorn. Why did you kill it? His head was in our mother's lap. It did not mean any harm. Its hoofs were silver. It was a unicorn and it had to be killed. I ought to have killed Meg too." "You are a traitor," said Gawain. "We could have taken it home and been allowed to serve at supper." "Anyway," said Gaheris, "now it is dead." Meg bowed her head over the unicorn's forelock of white and once again began to sob. Gareth began stroking the head. He had to turn away to hide his tears. By stroking it, he had found out how smooth and soft its coat was. He had seen a near view of its eye, now quickly fading, and this had brought the tragedy home to him. "Well, it is dead now, whatever," said Gaheris for the third time. "We had better take it home." "We managed to catch one," said Gawain, the wonder of their achievement beginning to dawn on him. "It was a brute," said Agravaine. "We caught it. We of ourselves." "Sir Gramor did not catch one, but we did." Gawain had forgotten about his sorrow for the unicorn. He began to dance round the body, waving his boar spear and uttering horrible shrieks. "We must have a greylock," said Gaheris. "We must do the matter properly, and cut its insides out and sling it over a pony and take it home to the castle, like proper hunters. And then she will be pleased. She will say, 'God's feet, but my sons are of mickle might.' We shall be allowed to be like Sir Gramor and King Pellinore. Everything will go well with us from now." "How must we set about the greylock?" "We cut out its guts," said Agravaine. Gareth got up and began to go away into the heather. He said, "I do not want to help cut him. Do you, Meg?" Meg, who was feeling ill inside herself, made no answer. Gareth untied her hair, and suddenly she was off, running for all she was worth away from the tragedy toward the castle. Gareth ran after her. "Meg! Meg!" he called. "Wait for me! Do not run!" But Meg continued to run, as swiftly as an antelope, with her bare feet twinkling behind her, and Gareth gave it up. He flung himself down in the heather and began to cry in earnest. He did not know why. At the Gralloch, the 3 remaining huntsmen were in trouble. They had begun to slit at the skin of the belly, but they did not know how to do it properly, and so they had perforated the intestines. Everything had begun to be horrible, and the once beautiful animal was spoiled and repulsive. All 3 of them loved the unicorn in their various ways. Agravaine in the most twisted one, and in proportion as they became responsible for spoiling its beauty, so they began to hate it for their guilt. Gawain particularly began to hate the body. He hated it for being dead, for having been beautiful, for making him feel a beast. He had loved it and helped to trap it, so now there was nothing to be done except to vent his shame and hatred of himself upon the corpse. He hacked and cut and felt like crying too. We shall never get it done, they panted. How can we ever carry it down, even if we manage to Gralloch? But we must, said Gaheris, we must. If we do not, what will be the good? We must take it home. We cannot carry it. We have not a pony. At a Gralloch they sling the beast over a pony. We must cut his head off, said Agravaine. We must cut its head off somehow and carry that. It would be enough if we took the head. We could carry it between us. So they set to work, hating their work, at the horrid business of hacking through its neck. Gareth stopped crying in the heather. He rolled on his back, and immediately he was looking straight into the sky. The clouds which were sailing majestically across its endless depth made him feel giddy. He thought, how far is it to that cloud? 1 mile? And the one above it? 2 miles? And beyond that, 1 mile and 1 mile and 1,000,000,000 miles? All in the empty blue. Perhaps I will fall off the earth now, supposing the earth is upside down, and then I shall go sailing and sailing away. I shall try to catch hold of the clouds as I pass them, but they will not stop me. Where shall I go? This thought made Gareth feel sick, and he was also feeling ashamed of himself for running away from the Gralloch. He became uncomfortable all over. In these circumstances, the only thing to do was to abandon the place in which he was feeling uncomfortable, in the hope of leaving his discomfort behind him. He got up and went back to the others. "Hello," said Gawain. "Did you catch her?" "No, she escaped away to the castle." "I hope she will not tell anybody," said Gaheris. "It has to be a surprise, or it is no good for us." The 3 butchers were daubed with sweat and blood, and they were absolutely miserable. Agravaine had been sick twice. Yet they continued in their labor, and Gareth helped them. "It is no good stopping now," said Gawain. "Think how good it will be if we can take it to our mother. She will probably come upstairs to say good night to us if we can take her what she needs. She will laugh and say we are mighty hunters." When the grisly spine was severed, the head was too heavy to carry. They got themselves in a mess trying to lift it. Then Gawain suggested that it had better be dragged with rope. There was none. "We could drag it by the horn," said Gareth. "At any rate, we could drag and push it like that, so long as it was downhill." Only one of them at a time could get a hold of the horn, so they took it in turns to do the hauling, while the others pushed behind when the head got snagged in a heather root or a drain. It was heavy for them, even in this way, so that they had to stop every 20 yards or so to change over. When we get to the castle," panted Gawain, "we will prop it up in the seat in the garden. Our mother is bound to walk past there when she goes for her walk before supper. Then we will stand in front of it until she is ready, and all will suddenly step back at once, and there it will be." "She'll be surprised," said Gaheris. When they had at last got it down from the sloping ground, there was another hitch. They found that it was no longer possible to drag it on the flat land because the horn did not give enough purchase. In this emergency, for it was getting near to supper time, Gareth voluntarily ran ahead to fetch a rope. The rope was tied around what remained of the head, and thus, at last, with eyes ruined, flesh bruised and separating from the bones, the muddy, bloody, heather-mangled exhibit was conveyed on its last stage to the herb garden. They heaved it to the seat and arranged its mane as well as they could. Gareth particularly tried to prop it up so that it would give a little idea of the beauty which he remembered. The Magic Queen came punctually on her walk, conversing with Sir Gramor and followed by her lapdogs, Tray, Blanche, and Sweetheart. She did not notice her 4 sons, lined up in front of the seat. They stood respectfully in a row, dirty, excited, their breasts beating with hope. "Now!" cried Gawain, and they stood aside. Queen Morgause did not see the unicorn. Her mind was busy with other things. With Sir Gramor she passed by. "Mother!" cried Gareth in a strange voice, and he ran after her, plucking at her skirt. "Yes, my white one, what do you want?" "Oh, Mother, we've got you a unicorn!" "How amusing they are, Sir Gramor," she said. "Well, my doves, you must run along and ask for your milk." "But, Mommy—" Yes, yes," she said in a low voice, "another time." And the Queen passed on with the puzzled knight of the Forêt Sauvage, electrical and quiet. She had not noticed that her children's clothes were ruined, had not even scolded them about that. When she found out about the unicorn later in the evening, she had them whipped for it, for she had spent an unsuccessful day with the English knights.